relationship is like a dance. It takes two to tango. Want to have healthy and successful relationships filled with passion, fun, and harmony? Hi, and welcome to the Two to Tango Show with Linda Sutton, a podcast that explores how we can improve your relationships with God, yourself, your intimate partners, and the community. Tune in and learn actionable insights and tips you can use to improve your relationships. The battle of the sexes ends here. Join Linda Sutton today and take your relationships to a whole new level while having fun every step of the way.
Welcome to the Two to Tango Show, where our role and our goal is to help you with all of your relationships, from your relationship with God and self, intimate partner and family, community, nature, and nations. Hi, I am your host and usually doing the most, Linda Sutton, and today we're going to be tackling the divine design of a woman, the basics. Now, I have been known to have a rant or two on social media. And it's usually, of course, in the conversation or topic of relationships. And one of my colleagues posted a meme that got my energy and my juices flowing in such a way that I realized that rather than respond, I wanted to bring kind of that energy and start a dialogue here with you all. And so I'm going to share with you the meme that he posted. And it was basically a conversation between a young lady and a young gentleman. And the lady is kind of mid-conversation, and the lady is saying to the gentleman, in order to be with me, you need to have goals, you need to have money and a house. And so, paraphrasing a little bit, the gentleman responds, he says, okay, so what are you bringing? Like, what do you bring to the table? And she said, me. And he walked away laughing. And that was the end of the meme. And there was some, it's a little bit of dialogue around that. And I remember that my first thought, and it's gonna probably spur some conversation, but my first thought was, I said, so I see somebody's children are not getting raised because I'm from the old school. And so I put the responsibility on parents and the previous generation in terms of making sure that our sons and daughters are getting some fundamental understandings so that when they enter into the world as adults, they have some kind of basic knowledge about things in a way that they are prepared for the next phase of their life. So today I wanted to talk about the divine design of a woman, the basics, and throughout the whole life of this show, we're going to be tackling kind of the divine design and the inherent design between man and woman and how those things show up in the dance of tango and the dance of relationships. But today we're going to tackle this one specifically because there's some basics here that I see in all of my relationship conversations and all the gurus and experts I see there. There's something that I realize is not being talked about explicitly that needs to be addressed. And so we're going to talk about kind of one or two of those basics today. They need to be tackled head on in our discussion, in part because out of this arises some of the dynamics that you see in leading and following in man and woman in the dance. And so if you don't understand some of that backdrop in terms of the divine design, then some of those things that show up will not make sense. And so in talking about the divine design of a woman, I want to talk about it less from a cultural standpoint, even though we will talk about that, and more from a biological imperative standpoint, a biological standpoint. And so the divine design of a woman that exists regardless of what's going on in culture and regardless of what's going on in society, regardless of what is trending, is that the woman has the inherent within her the ability to ensure the perpetuation of life itself, okay? Without the woman, there is no continuation of life. There is no continuation in terms of specifically in terms of the man or the woman. There's no continuation of your lineage. There's no continuation of legacy, but there's absolutely no continuation of life itself. And that is really important in terms of understanding roles and value and importance. I know that there is this dialogue that we're going to tackle today. And so I'm going to kind of address a couple of misconceptions, and then we're going to kind of get into some of the divine design elements and what that means in terms of how we can expect a young lady and a young man to approach their interactions with the opposite sex or the opposite gender. I know that some of this is delicate, more for adult ears, but I want to talk about them delicate. I want to talk about these issues delicately, but I am going to be, sometimes I'm going to have to be frank and real about some things, okay? In the space of intimacy, one of the misconceptions I want to break down immediately before I even get into the divine design is something that you hear talked about in religious circles. You hear a lot of, I hear a lot of male leaders talk about this when they're coaching young men. And they talk about this idea that the man provides the seed and the woman is the soil and incubator of life. And I want to clarify that and kind of break that down before we even get into the bulk of this discussion, because that is incorrect, okay? That is an incorrect statement. And by making it in such an incorrect statement, it sets the stage for a lot of misconceptions and misunderstandings as it relates to the contribution of man and woman to a relationship, to a family, to life, the creation of life. The man is not the seed and the woman the soil and the incubator. Going back to our basic biology, the sperm from the man must join and unite with the egg of the woman. And once those two things join together, those two cells, these two cells, if you will, join together, then from that, the seed is created. And then the woman provides the space of incubation and nourishment for the child after the creation of the seed. So both the man and the woman are involved in contributing, if you will, the genetic material that creates the seed that is the child. There is no man that is depositing seed into a woman and she's the soil. That is a misconception that creates a lot of misunderstandings, because what it does is it creates this idea that the gentleman is providing all of the genetic material that is required to create the child, and the woman is just the carrier of it, as opposed to that the woman is an equal contributor of genetic material to the creation of a child. Both of them equal and exactly half and half. So they go half on the baby. You are really going half on the baby, because half of the chromosomes are coming from the man, half of them are coming from the woman. They join together, they create the seed, and then the seed implants itself in the womb. I know I'm getting into kind of biology 101, and I'm assuming that most adults that are listening to this conversation understand that. But the assumptions that come in kind of casually making that statement have severe repercussions in terms of the way that men see that process, and therefore how they approach women who they're asking to participate in that process. Okay, so I really wanted to kind of clarify that, but both of the man and the woman are contributing to create the seed. And then the woman is tasked with incubating and nourishing that seed with the resources from her very body to assist that seed into growing to a human being. So literally that seed is drawing resources from her physical body, from her human body, to make itself into another human being, okay? So now that we've got that out of the way, we can tackle into kind of another level or a different understanding of the divine design of the woman and how that comes into play in terms of this meme that didn't quite set me off, but it could have had the potential to set me off. In terms of just misunderstandings, because once again, I'm about us creating harmony and synergy and not perpetuating misunderstandings that create a lack of understanding, a lack of respect for roles and contributions and the value of a person's roles. Okay, so this is where it gets delicate, because very few people talk about this explicitly, but I'm going to talk about it explicitly. So I want to make something very clear in terms of the divine design of a woman is from the moment a woman reaches puberty to a woman getting to that stage in her life that we refer to as menopause. A woman's body is preparing to create a child, preparing to make her a mother, and therefore preparing to create a family. Every single month in, month out, year in, year out, regardless of what we do culturally or medically to manipulate that process, a young woman's body every single month is going through the process in terms of her reproductive system and her endocrine system to prepare to make her a mother, to prepare for the conceiving of a child and the nurturing of a child, to prepare to make her a mother, therefore to prepare informally or formally to create a family. Without fail, once again, regardless of what we do to manipulate that in terms of birth control and other mechanisms, her body biologically is attempting to do that. She cannot run away from that because her body, her hormonal system is involved in that process every single month. Now, that is by nature, that is by design, that is a biological, if you will, imperative inherent within her. And so why is this important? Well, it's important to understand this because as long as a young woman or a woman is being abstinent or is being celibate and, kind of as a person's sexual engagement, that's for another conversation. But as long as she's being abstinent or celibate, then this process is not something that necessarily is in the forefront in terms of addressing others because she's not sexually engaged and she's not considering sexual engagement. She's not considering engaging in an intimate way that might result in a child, that might result in making her a mother, that might result in the creation of a family. However, the very moment that a young woman starts to consider the intimate or sexual advances or the intimate or sexual engagement or overtures that a young man is making, the minute she starts to consider those, then something else comes into play. Because even with the best of birth control methods and techniques and things like that, the very real possibility that she could become a mother and therefore give birth to a child and therefore create a family is very, very real. It becomes very, very real, even with the best of family planning techniques. That is a reality. And so because that is coming into play, and on top of that, every single month her body is setting the stage for that, then a woman has a completely different perspective when it comes to engaging with a gentleman and allowing her, not only allowing him into her space, but allowing him into her space in a way that it might allow for him to have access to her in a more intimate fashion. So by engaging him and allowing him into her space, it actually sets the stage for him to have greater access to her intimately. These are things that she needs to take into account up front. It's like you have to be conscious of who you let in your house before you let them in your house. Because once you let them in your house, there's a whole other dynamic at play. It becomes really hard to get them at your house once you let them in your house. So we need to, that's why we have a peephole. That's why you look at the peephole and you ask a whole bunch of questions before you open that door. And even if you open the door, you may leave the chain on the door so you can kind of get a greater assessment of the situation. And then after you ask your questions, after you look through the peephole, after you've looked through the door with the chain still on it, then you may decide to take off the chain, unlock the door, and allow the person in. Why do I give that analogy? Because in essence, that is what is going on. Because from day one, if she starts to entertain a gentleman's intimate or sexual advances or overtures, and she has the possibility from that exchange, from that encounter to potentially have a child, become a mother, and create a family, it is actually very important that from day one, from the outset, while she is in a clear, unengaged, unemotional state, not in a state of interaction, that she kind of asks some basic questions right out of the gate in terms of kind of making some initial assessments on whether or not she's going to allow someone to have any access to her, much less access to her that could result in an intimate encounter. And a woman, like a man, is very aware of kind of their endocrine system's response to a person of the opposite sex. You know, there's this whole thing about pheromones and hormones and things like that. We talk about raging hormones. So the physical body does respond to another person in a way that lets you know, okay, this is actually activating, this is activating my reproductive system. So I need to get some things clear before my reproductive system and my hormones and the pheromones take over. So because of that, she needs to be able to ask those questions up front out of the gate. Now, why is this important? Because in this meme, what she is asking for is she's asking this gentleman that she is considering engaging with, if he has the fundamental things and resources in place that would be needed if by chance, she became with child with his child and was becoming a mother and potentially a family. There is nothing wrong with that. Now, I know a lot of dating coaches and relationship coaches tell people that you shouldn't ask those questions at the gate, like just go with the flow, have a good time. Every relationship conversation shouldn't start out talking about marriage. You know, you should just have fun. And then, you know, as things get more serious, then start to tackle those conversations. Actually, I disagree. I think that a woman's nature to want to ask those questions up front aligns with her nature. It is natural. It is biological. And once again, because it is a process that she is going through every month, then it's not unreasonable that if a gentleman is hinting at the fact that he is interested in her sexually, that her first response would be like, wait a minute now, Chad. Now, you know, if you're coming over here with that, now you could become a daddy now. And I'm not trying to be no baby mama. And I ain't trying to have no baby daddies. So I need to know if you got some basics in place before I even consider your conversation, before I even get, you know, all involved and all entrenched, if you will, in this interaction with you. So let's tackle this whole idea of what do you bring to the table when she said me. She said me because, you know, just kind of taking it out of context, she understands, and a young woman understands all that is involved in becoming intimately involved with a young man in some way, shape, form, or fashion, if for no other reason than the fact that biologically, because she's managing that process, she is aware of how much is involved in managing her monthly cycle. So therefore, she understands, at least on some level, that there is a great deal of involvement in managing this process of being pregnant, giving birth to a child, caring for that child. If any young woman has ever watched another woman, her mother or an auntie or any other woman in her life be pregnant, she's had opportunity to see that process play out. So she understands all that is involved in terms of literally, even though we take it for granted because it's natural, it doesn't make it any less miraculous that literally she is using resources from her physical body to nurture from seed to birth and giving birth to a child. So that means that she's got to be conscious of the nutrition and supplementation that she's putting in. She's got to make sure that her emotional and mental state is healthy. She has to make sure that she is physically moving in such a way that she doesn't, you know, have any fall, or that, you know, there's any bump that might endanger the health of the baby or the child. She must ensure that she has the proper health care that is necessary to take care of that child. And on top of that, a woman is expected oftentimes to still function as if none of the rest of that is going on. if she has other children, she's still expected to care for that child. She may even be nursing. So at the same time that she is nourishing the creation of new life, she may be feeding the current life. She may be working, which I think is just extraordinary that people expect women to do all of these things. Hats off to them. And on top of that, if she's involved in a relationship with that gentleman, she may be still expected to fulfill his physical, sexual, mental, and emotional needs as well. So all of these things are at play. So she's managing all of these things in addition to possibly working. And caring for other children as well as herself. So all of these things are in play that are an essential part of the process. And so, her asking, do you have goals? Meaning, do you have a sense of purpose, a stability? Do you know who you are and where you're going? Do you have money? In other words, do you have resources that if this process results in a child, that you have thought through enough that you can provide provision, not only for the child, but for the mother who is the primary caretaker of the child. It's not just about taking care of the child, because the child is drawing resources from the mother. So the mother has to have the resources within her physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually to literally feed or give to the child so that the child remains healthy. So this whole idea that, I can care for the child and not care for the mother, that doesn't make any sense, because the mother's well-being, health, nutrition, both literal and figurative, is critical for the well-being and health of the child. So all of these things are coming into play. And then house, meaning, would you be able to create a space for this family that you could potentially create? Even if he doesn't have those things, her asking it should be a prompt to him to let him know that these are the things that you need to be thinking about having in place or will be required if you do happen to create a child. Whether or not you do it intentionally or not, the child still requires those things. The mother who is taking care of the child still requires those things. And so if you're going to be bringing those things to her in terms of your sexual advances and overtures, it should not surprise you that that should be something that she asks you up front in order to make a determination whether or not she wants to proceed, and also to determine whether or not it's a screening technique. You see this in nature with all types of genus and species of animals, where they size up the potential fathers of the animal kingdom, or that particular kingdom, and to determine whether or not they want to mate with them, because is this the strongest mate that I want to have to create children? So you even see that in nature, where the female species sizes up the male species to determine whether or not that makes sense, that mating makes sense. And so, that's a part of the process. Children need to be cared for from birth into their early adulthood stage. So this is quite a commitment that the woman is making. The man is making it as well, but because the woman is making the commitment with her physical body, her contribution to this process of being physically intimate and managing that process, the process of potentially becoming with child and therefore mother, and then creating a family, is a part of her divine design and her biology. And then if she continues to engage with the gentleman, then the process of meeting the physical, mental, emotional, and sexual needs of the gentleman is a part of the process. All of that, absent any financial contributions and things like that, is very, very involved in and of itself. And so I know, like I said, culturally and societally, there have been a lot of shifts, and there are things that, have changed, but the fundamental thing that's going on with the woman biologically has not changed. So even though we have the societal and cultural things that are more popular or more common, the undercurrent of those other elements is still there. And so you see a bit of a tug of war even in the engagement between a man and a woman, because a lot of young women, especially, the reason that in dating circles they say don't do that is because it's more natural for the woman to ask that. In previous cultural iterations, if you will, the gentleman would be asked that by the father or a male from the family when he first came over to the house. So back in the old school days, back in the old days, before we got to the current cultural dynamic, this process of questioning the young man and asking him what he brings to the table and what his intentions are and what he has in place is a part of even culture embedded in it, except it used to happen through the father or the male the male guardian of the family. So, as I said, back in the day, the gentleman would come over and visit the young lady in some way, shape, form, or fashion. A lot of times young ladies were not allowed to be left unchaperoned. And then when a gentleman expressed interest in a young lady, the father or some other male figure of the family would immediately address that young man and say, okay, what are your intentions? And they would also determine whether or not they had the resources to be able to support the young lady. I know that there's, all these things around bride price and dowry, but gentlemen would also look at that too. Like if the gentleman was not an upstanding gentleman within culture and society, he was not able to provide for the child and the woman and the child, like all these things would come into play. And this would be a conversation that men would have. And gentlemen understood that those questions would be asked of them from the outset. There was no bones about it. Like gentlemen didn't act shocked if they came or expressed an interest or a desire to see a young lady that her father or her uncle or grandfather or brother or some male figure from our family would approach him and say, okay, sir, what are your intentions with my daughter? What are your intentions with my sister? And have that conversation up front. Because we're not in a culture where gentlemen are having that conversations maybe as much, or young ladies are spending time outside of the home as adults on their own before that. Now you see young ladies asking that question and also being chastised, if you will, for kind of doing that process that normally their father or their uncle or their brother would do in terms of engaging that. So I think, in terms of, as I say, people being raised, because we're in a culture where people aren't having those conversations with their sons and daughters, we're seeing it play out in this way where a young man who is being asked basic questions about his ability to be responsible for himself, as well as be responsible for the consequences of his sexual activity, that is considered meme-worthy. So, we've got some work to do. And, that whole process of a woman screening a gentleman before she allows him to have access to her, to get close to her, to be within her intimate space. If you realize and understand that access that she is providing him, whether it just be sexual, whether it's emotional, whether it's mental, whether it's spiritual, that there's a screening process that is appropriate for her to undergo before she allows him in, that would also help you to understand some of the dynamics of trust and connection that occur in the early stages of that dance interaction. So in tango, when a gentleman is seeking to be in close physical proximity to a woman still engages naturally and kind of almost second nature in that process to screen him, because regardless of whether it's sexual or not, there is an intimacy that is there by allowing a gentleman to get that physically close to you and giving him access to you physically, even if not sexually, that proximity is going to activate and engage that process of her that's going to start that screening process. So that process of questions that she will ask in terms of her safety and her well-being, her understanding that it's an intimate encounter just by nature of proximity, and that she should do some screening on the front end before she permits him to get closer and progressively closer to her. If you understand that about her divine design and what it activates with her, then you will understand kind of some natural things that will occur when a young lady engages. And also for my young ladies that are watching or listening, that you shouldn't be ashamed or embarrassed that is your natural inclination, because it is in part inspired by your biology. If you're going to put your physical bosoms on a man's chest, and dance with him chest to chest, and let him have his arms around you and can smell the scent of your hair and smell the scent of your skin and touch you and an embrace that would be the beginning of an intimate encounter, then you should not you should feel some kind of way when your natural inclination is to want to size him up and assess him before you get that engaged and connected and close to him. So the fact that you have that kind of inclination, that impulse, that desire, kind of second nature to do that, to ask questions, to want to know the answers, should not bother you. It's actually very natural, and you should continue to do it because you have a lot at stake. Once you start to engage with a gentleman sexually, once you begin to engage with him in a way that you could potentially create a family with him, that's a process that technically can't be reversed. And so if he changes his mind later, or you change your mind later, once the children are here, that's a very, very different dynamic that you can't come back out of. You are, even if you two never consider continuing in the relationship, you will forever be connected spiritually and physically by the fact that you are literally nurturing his bloodline, even if he leaves. And this is real talk, because this is the nature of relationships that we sometimes see today. And that needs to be addressed. And some of that can be addressed and would be addressed in the dynamic that is kind of addressed by this meme. So I really wanted to kind of tackle that. Gentlemen who I like to say raised well, that's real talk, understand that when they're asking of a lady to entertain his advances, he understands that there's this other piece. That there's this potential of him becoming a father. If a gentleman is making sexual advances to a young woman and has no awareness that one of the consequences of that engagement is that he could become a father, then there is some additional training and maturation that needs to go on his side, and we need to address that in a whole nother conversation. Now, I know we've talked a lot about the biological imperative as it comes to the divine design of a woman and the basics. And so I just, really want to underscore that, like, she's a woman from day one of puberty to the last day, which is menopause. Her body is preparing to have children. Her body is preparing to make her mother. Her body is preparing to have a family. So the fact that women are very relationship oriented, the fact that women are asking for commitment up front, the fact that women are asking for commitment quickly when they are asked to, consider a man's intimate or sexual advances, once again, is very, very natural. It's very, very appropriate, and is very, very much a sign of a mature woman, because that is a very real reality from her right out of the gate. And so it's not unnatural. It's not that women are, just, chomping at the bit to try to get a man to commit and all that stuff. What she's doing is she is aware of something that perhaps the gentleman might not have been trained or taught to be aware of. That's a reality that they both need to address on the front end before they engage further. I just want to talk about the biological piece. Now, there is a mental, emotional, and spiritual piece of a woman's divine design. Her ability to multiply, nourish, and nurture not only physical babies, but also her partner, the gentleman that she chooses to really partner with for long term. She does have ability to multiply, nourish, and nurture his ideas, his goals, the things that he's attempting to make manifest in the world. And we've talked a little bit about that in terms of the anatomy of a woman, the leader and follower, but that's a discussion for another day. So I just wanted to address that with you today, specifically around the divine design, kind of the basic 101, woman 101, fundamental 101 of what it means to be a woman and how that comes into play, not only in her interactions with gentlemen, but also to begin to understand some of the things, the inherent natural second nature things that you will see show up in terms of how a woman engages in spite of what might be going on culturally or society. So we have been talking about the divine design of a woman here on the Two to Tango show. I'm your host, Doing the Most. And as we say here on the Two to Tango show, it not only takes you to tango, but absolutely it takes you to tango. Ciao.
We have just concluded another moving episode of the Two to Tango show with Linda Sutton. Did you enjoy the show? If so, head over to the2totangoshow.com and discover a whole array of resources to help you spice up your relationship in every way. That's tangoshow.com. We would also like to hear from you, so don't forget to leave a review or feedback. Join us again next week for another entertaining and fun episode. Until then,